Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first San Francisco UX Writers Meetup of 2021. My name is Kirsten Forsberg. I'm the organizer of the meetup and will be hosting today. Catherine Strauss is the other co-organizer, and she has helped organize this event. I want to take a quick moment and recognize Indeed for sponsoring this event, and for Jason, who will be providing our tech support today. Have a couple quick announcements before we get the show on the road. Thank you for everyone who has taken the survey and provided feedback. We've incorporated some of the ideas into today's event, and we'll keep those in mind for future events as well. Today's event will not have any breakout rooms. Instead, Laura has incorporated some interactive elements throughout, and we have time for a Q&A at the end. I am pasting the link to join the Slack group in the Zoom chat. I'll be posting that a couple of times so that way people who join later are able to access that link as well. In the Slack group, there is a code of conduct which you can read at your leisure. Closed captioning is available in Zoom if you find that helpful. It will be on the bottom right corner of the Zoom toolbar. You'll see the CC. Our next event is Wednesday, February 17th with Carmen Martinez. She'll speak to us about solving errors with conversational design. That event is live on our Meetup page, and you can find more information and sign up on our Meetup page. And now I'm excited to introduce our first speaker of the year. Laurah Mwirichia is a writer, content strategist, and user experience advocate. She's an avid proponent of creating user-friendly experiences and loves bringing together the ever-intersecting world of copy and design. She freelanced for several years as a full-time writer in the New York City startup scene. She discovered her passion and excitement for UX writing and never looked back. She is currently a UX writer at Square. And go ahead and take it away, Laura.
Thanks so much, Kristen and Catherine, for having me on. And hi, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. Really excited to talk to you about UX writing and project management and how you can bring a project management mindset into your writing. So I'll start by sharing my screen. Awesome. To kind of get kicked off, can everyone see my screen? Perfect. All right, great. So like I said, I'm Laura. I'm a product writer at Square, and we're going to be talking about bringing a project management mindset to your writing. So a little bit about me and kind of the trajectory of how I got into what I'm doing. I kind of started off my education studying anthropology and biology, which really kind of got me to kind of start understanding a lot about like research, social interaction, just kind of get more interest in people and what they do. Then my first career kind of led me into social work, where I did have like just a lot of amazing experiences with all sorts of people. But then I kind of realized that wasn't my path, and I wanted to switch into something that was a little bit more me. And then I realized I really love writing. And so that's when I moved to New York and started doing a lot of freelance writing, especially in the financial tech world, which led me into content marketing. And while I was there, kind of really bolstered my love for UX writing. And that's where I am now. So I always say like the copy is the most human part of the interaction, but what does that mean for us as UX writers? It means the copy is where we can shine our most human attributes, right? It's how we can be the most empathetic, to be the most conversational that we can be. We can use copy to drive really amazing product experiences and bring our products into the next level. And additionally, we can also use, it's an opportunity to get the whole team involved in shaping the user experience. So why is it important to approach what we do in a methodical and well thought out way? I kind of lean on project management because it's a language that the entire team already understands, right? So they are kind of organized around project management, structures and decision making, and this kind of just kind of bringing yourself into that can kind of give you an extra bit of leverage whenever you're trying to interact with designers and engineers and project and product managers as well. So this is our first interactive part of the presentation. So if you want to just drop in the chat what it is you think that project managers do. And we'll just take a minute. All right, I'm seeing organize, wrangle the cats, keep everything on track, nag people and tell the bad news, fair enough. Organize projects for clear vision, I love that. Timelines, milestones, I'm seeing a lot of timelines. Kind of helping the project move on. Yeah, absolutely. So all these are things that project managers are really good at and are, have to be good at in order for them to do their job properly. So all these are absolutely correct. That is what they do. But one of the big things that we can kind of take away from that is how they kind of drive the products they work on, right? So project managers plan, organize, direct completion of projects, make sure they're done on time, make sure they're done on budget, and make sure that they're within scope. So what does that have to do with us as UX writers? Well, we kind of do the same thing, right? So we need to plan, make sure that our work is done on time and, so that it's able to ship and be, get into the product and be created in a timely manner. We need to be organized, right? We need to make sure that the content that we create can be easily found, can be easily incorporated and implemented into what we're creating really, really seamlessly. This helps the team obviously stay on budget because projects aren't running behind. They're not waiting on copy. And then we kind of help direct the copy, right? So we're in charge of the copy. So we determine the scope of the content that we can and cannot produce, and then we drive it from start to finish. So in a way, just kind of taking these elements and incorporating it into what we already do can kind of give you a structure to organize, your projects and the work that you're creating. So I kind of took this down and distilled it into what I like to call the 8 rules of project management for UX writing. And these are just actionable things that, PMs do that we can kind of take and incorporate into our jobs. Kind of like as an aside, before getting into UX, I dabbled with the idea of being a project or product manager. I just knew that I loved big picture thinking. I like, working with products, creating products. I like watching, things ship and be created and then be used by real people. And I wasn't really sure, how I was going to do it, but I was like, I need to be working with product. And so, I kind of was talking to some product managers and some project managers, kind of trying to learn what it is they do at their work. And while I didn't ultimately end up doing that, and I ended up coming in and doing UX writing, I realized that, a lot of the stuff that they were saying comes in really handy to what I do now. So let's dive into what it is they do. So my 8 rules of project management for UX, these are only 4, but we'll get into the other 8, are number 1, have a plan. So you want to be detailed, you want to be organized, right? You're not the only one who needs to make sense of the content that you're creating. So if you make sure that it's organized, other people can kind of support you and, help you as needed. But if your stuff's kind of all over the place and hard to find, it's very difficult to keep track of that. So, it's really important to just kind of have a plan and be really detailed about what you're doing. The next thing is to make sure that you're managing expectations. This is really, really hard sometimes for writers because everyone thinks that we can just do everything and anything. And, they'll be like, all right, fine. We need a copywriter, a content marketer, a product marketer, a UX writer, a part-time designer, and also maybe, be able to do some CSS and HTML on the side. There's just not enough hours in the day to be able to do all of that. So a really important part of making sure that you're able to complete your best work is managing expectations and making sure that what you say you can deliver is what you can deliver and nothing more. And it's okay if, sometimes burnout happens and, you kind of over promise, but just kind of making sure you know your own limits and kind of start to rein it in when you think it's gonna start interfering with your ability to do what you need to do. Next is visualize your deliverables. So, this took me a while to understand that as a writer, you really need to show people your process. If you're not able to show people your process, they're not really going to understand it, and therefore they're not really going to value it, right? So it's super, super important that people are seeing how we're creating what we're creating and explaining it to them like, hey, this is what we're creating, this is why we're creating it, and this is the time it will take. That's really, really important in terms of getting buy-in from the rest of your team. And then don't micromanage. This is another thing that writers, I find, are pretty notorious for, is being little like micromanagers of copy. And that's while it's totally understandable, it's super important that the copy we create is the copy that we want people to see. It's micromanaging the copy ends up really kind of taking a lot of time, a lot of effort, and is kind of just counterproductive in the long run. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really promote trust. So those are the first 4. And we're on to our next quiz question. So in one word, how do you feel like when you're being micromanaged? Yeah, trapped, frustrated, disrespected, insecure, pissed off. That is 2 words, but still. Super stressed, not understood, suffocated. Yeah, I mean, completely. These are all totally true. And when you're bringing that kind of mindset into the work that you're doing, that's kind of what your coworkers are feeling. They feel like, well, this person doesn't trust me. This person is, pressuring me to do this, this, and this. And that's not really what you want. That's not, as we would say, that's not the energy you want to bring into your workplace. You want to kind of foster an environment of trust. And that's not saying that it's like, all right, let everyone just write anything and, essentially YOLO. But what you do want to do is kind of, create an environment where people feel comfortable bringing their ideas to you, even if those ideas are about writing or research or whatever it is, and you kind of being this facilitator that can absorb all of that and then put out really good copy. So just kind of building that trust within your team. All right. So the other rules are, so work as a team, right? This kind of super, super important for project managers, because if they're not working as a team, they're never going to be able to get any of their work done, right? So as a writer, you're working probably for a lot of cross-functional teams, and copy touches pretty much everything. So you want to make sure that you're really trying to work to build relationships with designers, with developers, with PMs and engineers that will help you get the kind of context that you need to be able to do your job well. You also want to be agile. You want to be ready to pivot for any new scenario that comes up, any edge case, engineering constraints, global pandemics, whatever it is. You want to be able to just kind of be ready, to drop something and pick up something else as needed. I know, for example, working at Square, when I started, I was like, oh, these are going to be really fun projects. I'm working on X, Y, and Z. And then the pandemic happened and everyone had to drop everything that they were doing and start working on messaging for COVID and getting help for sellers and things like that. And so just kind of being ready to be like, okay, that was on the roadmap, but something else has happened. It's time to write about something else and just do something completely different. And that should be totally okay. Open communication, right? You don't want to hide things that are not working. So sometimes it's scary to be like, well, I can't figure out this sentence. I can't figure out, this content strategy. Like, this is really, this is just so difficult. Being open with your team about that kind of stuff kind of helps bring you closer, but also you can get a lot of ideas from everywhere. Be open to stuff like brainstorms and workshopping. And it's okay to just be like, I don't know if I can ever make this sentence better. And, I need some help. So just be open with people, and people love to see that, you're willing to kind of be vulnerable as well. And then the next one is just kind of keep improving, right? So what works today might not work tomorrow. And this is why I love content audits, because they're a really good way to make sure that the copy that you're creating is really updated and up to par with like the best practices of the day. So they're really great ways to practice your project management. And, one way is like visioning exercises that you can kind of do with a designer, where you kind of have a journey map and kind of figure out what it is you want for the product. Content workshops. These are really fun, I think, and really informative to get a lot of people from around the team together, and also, all sorts of minds together into brainstorming. So whether that's, bringing in CS, bringing in engineering, bringing in design, together to just kind of come up with content that can help fit into like a larger content strategy. Content workshops are really great for that. And then content audits, what we're going to be kind of focused on today, that's just a really good way to bring the team together and really, really organized, really, really visual, problem solve. And best of all, you like get a solution at the end of the day that can be implemented immediately. So that's really awesome, I think. So that's where we're going to focus on content audits. So just kind of like, I'm kind of curious as to how many people here have done a content audit before? Yay, I'm seeing a lot of people. That's awesome. So many. Yeah, I know. I hear it. Some people who do not know what a content audit is. Yeah, fair enough. So for those of you who don't know, a content audit is basically where you go through all the content and the copy on whether it's a web page or a product or just a certain flow, and basically audit the content, make sure it works for you, make sure it fits your tone and voice, make sure it's helpful, make sure it's concise and useful. Someone mentioned that they love / hate them. True, they can be very time consuming and it's a little bit annoying, but they're just super helpful and super important, and they really give great results. So let's see. So content audits, why are we doing them? So those of you who have done them, why they're important, right? They involve a lot of cross-functional partners. So, you're not writing in a vacuum. You are bringing everyone together and kind of working together to look through the content and figure out what works and what doesn't. But on that note, they're also kind of scary, right? Getting feedback, getting critique is kind of hard for pretty much everyone. And I remember one of my design coworkers, was like, well, I went to art school, so you can't hurt my feelings. And ever since then, I've just kind of been channeling that, because it's just a really good mindset to have when you're bringing, especially writing, for people to just kind of critique and look at and give feedback. So just kind of go in with that confidence of like, it's fine, people, don't get defensive, and just kind of be confident when going into them. But they're really awesome. Like I said, you get really it's really actionable work. It's delivered. It has immediate impact once the audit is done and all the new content is kind of, spun up. You're good to go. You can start recording all the impact that's already creating. But because I love content audits so much, there's more, right? So it's also a really good way to learn about the product, especially if you're new. It's just kind of like a really good first step that you can kind of start taking to start learning the tone of the product, the voice, that kind of stuff. New problems to solve, right? You can kind of going through the flow step by step, especially in content audits, you can start seeing like, well, this doesn't make sense, or why does this even exist? Can this be somewhere else? It's a really great way to just kind of work through those problems. You keep up with voice and tone standards. You can kind of learn more about what's going on in the industry, what other companies are doing, what other writers are doing. And then, every year, you can just kind of keep improving that. you can take stock in inventory and just kind of keep improving. You can you make sure that all of your writing and your content is streamlined across multiple platforms if that's kind of the space that you're working in. It helps you get organized. You know, the thing about content audits is you have to be organized. You can't just have a really messy audit because it's not going to make sense. So this is a really good way to kind of, especially if you're kind of learning, force yourself to kind of start organizing your content. And all of us struggle with this. I've never met a writer who's like, yeah, I have the whole organization thing figured out, because nobody really does. So this is just a really great way to just kind of get into that space and keep and hold yourself accountable. Also, you get better, you become a better writer every year, hopefully. You're improving. And, you know, maybe what you did last year, you could do a better job this year and the next year and the year after that. And so kind of bringing those back in is a good way to just kind of grow along with the product. And so I think that's a really cool part of content audits. So how do we get started on an audit? I'm just going to go through certain aspects of audits, since it seems like a lot of people have already done audits. I'm going to just kind of show you screenshots of what I do in my audits personally, and how I tie those into kind of one of the 8 principles of project management. So first, as we all know, in audits, set your goals. What are you auditing for? You know, are we looking to do voice and tone stuff? Are we looking, you know, to problem solve? Like, what is our goal for this audit? Are we doing a certain flow? Are we doing the whole thing? So number 1, set your goal. Number 2, gather all your content somehow. This is, you know, I usually lead on our engineers to kind of pull the content for me, and they can usually do it in about 5 minutes. Some people might not have access to that. And so however you need to kind of take all your content and organize it in a way that you understand. So just make sure it's all in one place. Organize it, right? Figure out how you want it to look like. Are we trying to, you know, are we making updates here and, you know, doing whatever else you need to do. I usually use an Excel spreadsheet, and now Google Sheets. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a little bit. And then you do your audit, of course. That's where the writing part comes in. And then there's a review and implementation. And so, you know, I was actually having a conversation with a lead designer the other day. And, you know, he was like, well, you know, it's just, I know it's not just writing, but I don't know what else goes into it. And I'm just like, I was just thinking about content audits, and it's like, of all of these, only one step of these is actually writing. There's a lot of other things that need to happen before and after the writing occurs that we are kind of in charge of. But the only visible, I guess in quotes, visible part is like the words. So like I said, this is why it's super, super important to lay out your process, because people miss all of this and only see that you changed the words. And that's not the impression that we want people to have, because you're doing a lot more work than just, you know, updating a couple things. So first things first, have a plan, right? Audit with purpose. So are we improving brand alignment, clearing up inconsistencies? Are we simplifying language? What is the purpose of this content? Vision. I like to kind of have a vision in place. So what's the vision for the product? What do we see as the future of this product 5 years from now, you know, 3 years from now, whatever it is. And then kind of align for that, because the last thing you want is always having to do a content audit for the entire thing. So if you're going to be doing a big one, just make sure that you are aligned with where the product is going, and you're not just kind of doing your own thing. And then research, of course, start as early as possible. I usually start with like calls from customer support. Those usually have really good, they usually have a good insight of where people are getting stuck, since that's when they get calls. I go through like their chatbot logs, which are pretty, easy to go through, like, eating lunch and just kind of scrolling through what people are texting. And then there's also like more deeper research, actually maybe pairing up with a researcher or a PM and really kind of talking to customers one-on-one and kind of learning what their big pain points are. So while we're here, I guess, talking about research, What tools have you all used for research and testing, if you do research and testing before audits? Yeah, usertesting.com. That one we use a lot at Square, actually. Super popular. Marketing demographics. Yeah, people really underestimate the amount of data marketing has. I mentioned earlier, I used to be in marketing, and while I did content marketing, you'd see, I had access to what, the demand gen team was working on, and I was like, wow, we can really target people down to their age and nationality and their last favorite, watched cat video. It was really kind of wild. So marketing has a lot of data, use it. Zendesk Analytics, Google Analytics, support inquiries, absolutely. Trustpilot reviews, that's a good one. I sometimes check Twitter, and I'm subscribed to the Square Reddit so I can keep track of what people are saying about us. Yeah, page views, heat maps, talking to your data team. Yeah, whatever you got to do to kind of get as much context as possible into what you're doing, for sure. So manage expectations. This is something I absolutely think is important. So my way of doing it, my outline would be saying something like the purpose of this audit, and it doesn't always have to be an audit, it can be whatever it is you're working on. The purpose of this audit is to do X. The purpose of this audit is not to do Y. And I like making that very, very clear. So this is like a kind of fake overview. It's actually for a content strategy I'm working on, but I tweaked it for an audit because that's what I would write. And so basically it's just, laying out like what the product is. Square Contracts has continued to grow and respond to the needs of our sellers since launch in 2020. It's imperative that we meet our users where they're at in their business. So we'll simultaneously while we're working on creating a vision, we'll also simultaneously work on a voice for what it should sound like. And then I always include what we're doing and what we're not doing. So what we're doing, I might say something like, we're doing a content audit. We're going to align, the current voice and tone with the Square brand. And then I'll say what we're not doing. Maybe I'll say something like, we're not addressing the issue of content gaps in the overall product. And essentially the purpose of this is to make sure that people understand very, very clearly, essentially in like black and white, exactly what your goals, your plans, and your methods are. So then, they can't just be like, well, I thought you were doing this, and then it's not true. So that's, this is kind of super important for me, at least, that I've found that people really respond well to. Visualize deliverables. I told you I'd show you one of my Google Sheets. So essentially, just like I put it in something like a Google Sheet for several reasons. One, it's really easy to communicate in Google Sheets, right? You can just leave comments and people can see them, and it can go, there's a lot of back and forth that can happen. So on the leftmost side is the string, which engineering just kind of pulled all of the strings. The current copy, which comes along with the string. And then I usually have a side for updated copy and comments. And this is just like a really small sliver of it, but we'll go through different flows using this. This is 13,000 lines long, but we only narrowed it down to the areas that we needed. And then just kind of going through, and it's like, why are we changing this? Like, do you want something to be more action forward? Is the word choice making sense? Are people really confused on some of the words we're using? And so this is what we do. And then I have a little progress bar at the side to just kind of show people who pop into the doc where we are in the process. And also I like to color code things. I think that is just fun. But the content, so I'll just say something, okay, we're in the content audit, you do a checkbox when the content is updated, when the people are reviewing, and then just people kind of know where everything's at. And I find that to be super, super helpful. Back to not micromanaging, which is the other expectations. Like I said, if you're not writing for the user, you're writing for yourself. And so you want to make sure that the questions you're asking are really bringing people into the conversation instead of pushing them out. So, just remember, it's okay for other people to have ideas. It's your job to just kind of facilitate that conversation, take that information, document it, visualize it, and then use it to produce the best possible outcome. And then working as a team, right? You don't want to go at it by yourself. That would be really boring, and it would be really difficult to do that. So just reach out to folks. And this is also just kind of as a way of like building relationships and helping other people feel included. So this is just like a screenshot of a Slack message that I had with a developer for the contracts product. And essentially it was just like, hey, can you pull these contract strings for me? And they're like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. And then, we just kind of worked on it together. And this, that already kind of starts building those relationships with folks that are going to be there to support you and help you. Like, I could have manually gone through the entire product and I guess done, pull out every single word. But this is so much easier, so much faster, and helped build a little bit of camaraderie between me and this particular developer, which is great. Next is you should be, agile and flexible and ready to kind of change this up. And this one, I really like this example. This is a screenshot from GitHub, which is kind of where the developers hang out and, kind of push all the new updates in. And a developer kind of messaged in here and was like, hey, I feel like we should have a tooltip here that says where, contract message should be, and give a little more information. I think it's unclear, in this part, and having a tooltip here will, it just makes more sense to me. And, and then they tagged me in it, as well as the PM. And I was like, sure, that sounds good. And I went through, created it, added it to the doc, and added it to Figma, and it was pushed through. At Square, we like, in my team especially, we love using the word knit, which is just kind of like a really harmless way of commenting on someone without stepping on their toes, right? So this is like clearly a copy task, but they don't want to be like, why aren't you doing your job? Because I'm obviously doing my job. But this is just like a really good suggestion that they're like, I want to tell someone and I don't want them to feel bad. And, I don't care. I'm fine. But maybe this could be something that you kind of explore with coworkers when you're like, hey, just like a knit here, but are we sure that these colors are, accessible, or whatever it is to whoever is not working in the field you're working in. And it just kind of helps build that conversation and build that trust. Another reason I really love working with, cross-functional partners, especially with developers, is that they're in the product so much and they ask really, really important questions. They know how it works from the back to the front. And so they can really give you really good insight as to how to explain things, in a way that will make sense for both the user and for them in the back end. And so that's just really good, a good insight that you don't want to lose out on. Like the people building the products that you're working on are a great resource to lean on. And then open communication, right? So whenever we're doing our reviews, is again, more screenshots from how we talk. I'll take the stuff from the Excel doc from the Google Sheets, whatever we're calling it, that we are kind of stuck on, or there's just a lot of going back and forth. And I'll screenshot those screens with a copy, and I'll put them in like either a Word doc or a Google Slides. And basically we'll have a meeting and we'll all kind of sit down, talk, take notes. And so it'll just be a lot of back and forth, right? So this is between me, a product manager, a project manager, and a designer, just kind of having back and forths of, okay, well, do we like this? Let's propose this copy. Okay, but does that confuse this other thing? And this kind of like really working out the kinks in some of the copy in a way that's a little more digestible. And then once we come to a conclusion, I then put it back onto the spreadsheet, and then kind of link to this communication that happened on here. The good thing about this is like, you have, essentially the receipts. So you can always come back and be like, why did we choose this word again? And you can just kind of go back into the doc and be like, oh yeah, we talked about this 7 months ago, and this is why we picked this word. And so I've used this a lot before, and it's just really, really great. And especially if you don't work with people in the same time zones, which I don't, everyone can kind of get to it on their own time, which is extra helpful. And then, of course, last but not least, improving the practice, right? Whenever you're kind of going through, you want to kind of make sure, like, are these titles providing clarity? These buttons, are they really helping the user? Are these descriptions being helpful? Are these empty states an opportunity to educate or redirect someone? Are they labels, like I say, short, sweet, and to the point? Controls, are they like informative? Are they clear? Do people know what they're doing? These are just super important things. And like I said, the improving your practice isn't just necessarily about the work itself. It's also improving yourself as a person and you as a writer. I know, like, I'm constantly reading books about UX. I have one UX book that I kind of keep at my side at all times. Actually, maybe here, yes. I use Content Strategy Toolkit. I'm not like pushing it or anything. I don't know these people, but I love this book. And every time I'm like, wow, I want to do, I want to do an audit, or I want to do, whatever, got some content strategy. I kind of lean on this for support. So if you have a really good book that you like and, you want to like shout out to people, feel free to drop it in the comments, and everyone can kind of see what everyone is reading and what they kind of use for inspiration and just kind of as their daily, ongoing workbook. So helpful collaboration tools and tips. So for me, whenever I'm trying to work with folks, like I said, trying to bring them into my kind of headspace, especially when I'm looking for feedback, it helps to just kind of phrase your questions in a way that, makes sense to them, and that supports them to give you feedback that is helpful. So you can ask things like, does this make sense? Okay, I switched these around. I am so sorry. Okay, do ask, does this make sense? Do not ask, is this witty and fun? And also do not ask, do you like my writing? So I did not switch the last two, but the yellow and green are switched around. So instead of, does this make sense? Ask something like, is this language a user would understand? Instead of saying, is this witty and fun? Ask something like, is this empathetic and inclusive? Instead of asking, do you like my writing? You can ask something like, is this conversational? Okay, so just the titles are switched. These are just kind of like easy ways to just kind of help people. And there's so many other ways to just kind of ask kind of more neutrally questions so that you actually get feedback that is useful without feeling like it's kind of attacking on the level. And then, one more thing is just like use collaborative tools. You'll see, like I said, I use a lot of stuff in the Google Suite. So Google Sheets, Google Docs, Google Slides, because they're so interactive and because the teams can always just pop in, write comments, and I can just go through every day and read their comments and iterate on my work based on that. We also use Zoom / Google Meet, Jamboard, which is my new favorite. Like as a writer, I'm not, Figma is fine, but I spent like 10 minutes the other day trying to learn how to do auto resize on Figma and finally gave up. And I was like, I hate this. I'll never be able to do this. So I've gravitated towards Jamboard. It's a free Google thing. And it's essentially just like a whiteboarding situation. And it's super easy to use and it makes me feel really happy. So, just a shout out to Jamboard. Of course, there's always Figma, Notion, Slack, Trello, Monday.com. Whatever you need to do, Asana is on there as well. As long as you have tools that are really, really interactive, you're gonna kind of keep. You're gonna make sure that you're able to communicate with your team. So, our last question. Content audits. So what are your favorite tools of the trade? What do you use to communicate with folks, and what are you working on? What do you use to kind of to work on and do your work? content strategical. Hey, I'm just seeing the comments now. You know, I know a lot of people use Slack at work. You know, let's see. Does anyone have any like preferences over like Trello versus Monday.com versus Notion, Dropbox Paper? It's a good one. Hive. I've never heard of Hive. That's I'll look that up. Quip, Airtable for sure. Asana, yeah, and Jira, of course. Yeah, so there's just a lot of new tools, Miro as well, yep. There's just a lot of new tools that really kind of help bring writing and design together. And these are just, you know, things that you shouldn't be scared to test out. A lot of them are free. A lot of them are just kind of, or just, you know, maybe not super expensive. And so if, you know, if that kind of happens, if you do have that opportunity, that's, you know, that's awesome. So definitely, you know, definitely keep adding to your toolkit. And then I'll just kind of end on this kind of, I guess, side note. So one of our, someone at my work kind of sent out an email the other day, and he'd included something about imposter syndrome, and he's super high up in the company. So I was like, you shouldn't be having imposter syndrome. You know, you like work with the CEO every day. But it was really nice to know that, like, no matter how high up you are in the world, apparently you still have imposter syndrome. So that I thought was pretty interesting. And so he added this quote, which is from him. And he was like, you know that many of your greatest strengths are obvious to everyone, but ironically not to yourself. You know, and it was just kind of around the fact that, like, imposter syndrome is really an asset and not a liability, right? It's a good indicator that you're a good person and a good leader, and that you're you're deeply, like, self-aware, you're introspective, you're open to the better way. And then, like, also what the opposite of imposter syndrome is essentially the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Which is like, I just overestimate my knowledge and ability in a specific area. And that's not where you want to be. So, you know, just kind of remember that whenever you're kind of going through your work, and you're just kind of keeping that in mind, like, hey, I'm not sure if this is the right move. You know, this, instead of being like, well, I know everything, reaching out to folks and being like, I kind of would like some support, or what do you think about this, is, you know, is this kind of a good way to kind of like frame that. So I thought it was really powerful, and even though it has nothing to do with the presentation today, I wanted to share it with someone. So that's like my plug. So there you go. Yeah, and I think that's it for me. You can email me, I guess. There's my website, Twitter at @elmarich, and feel free to add me on LinkedIn. That's always fun. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, I think we're posting in the Slack channel, right, Kristen?
Yeah, there have been a lot of really great questions in the Zoom chat. The January 2021 Slack channel is also open for questions. I've been copying some of the questions that came in earlier. And while people are kind of processing and getting their thoughts together, I'll share some of those. And a blanket apology for mispronouncing names. The first one came from Wajtek. How do I recognize that I'm micromanaging another writer or peers on my team?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's like a management question, but I love that. So, you know, if you want to, how I think about it is just kind of like putting yourself in their position. If you had a manager that was acting like you're acting, how would you feel? Like, do you think would you feel micromanaged, or would you feel supported? And that's the thing about micromanaging, is that people think they're supporting their staff or they're supporting their writers, and you're actually doing the opposite. You're kind of crippling their ability to do work. You're crippling their ability to, you know, kind of be productive. And that's really like not the way to go. So if you're seeing your, you know, your folks just kind of, you know, just not being as engaged as they should be, not being as productive, being really scared to kind of bring up ideas and points, then maybe that's something that you take a step back and be like, okay, where can I let go? Where can I start delegating, and let people, you know, just kind of, you know, start taking ownership of their own space.
Yeah, that's great feedback. There are a number of questions around content audits that were asked before you walked us through, and there are some great crowdsourcing answers. If you feel like your question didn't get answered, please ask it again. Another question from Tanya, where is the line of not crossing privacy concerns when using data for marketing and customer service?
That's a great point. That's a really good point. I finally, like, like I said, marketing has so much access to so much data. And did we legally obtain that data? Yes. Did people actually give it to us? And do they know what they're giving away? Probably not. So I would have to say that, like, that's kind of your call and kind of your company's call. There's a lot of companies that are very, like, super clear on privacy lines, are not going to overstep boundaries and stuff like that. I'd say just kind of, follow best practices, see what other people are doing, see what it is and isn't okay. And kind of follow that. I kind of can't decide for you what is and isn't okay to kind of research, based on the data that you have. But, as long as you're using the best practices that you have, and you're not essentially abusing your power and the data that you have, I think you're probably fine. If you're even asking that question, you're probably like a good person. So
I have kind of a longer question from Chuck. What happens when programmers have embedded a lot of the content in their code rather than externalize it? Would the greater difficulty of extracting all the content increase the possibility that getting it all extracted would be resisted? What are ways that you can influence the externalization of all content so that it's easy to inventory and even relatively easy to access yourself? I'll post it in the chat. I know it was a long one and there was a lot of questions in there. So if you need to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And that, to me, kind of speaks to two things, copy debt and tech debt, right? So is it best practice to incorporate the copy inside the code? Probably not. But did they do it because it was probably like the easiest and fastest way to do something? Yes. And so that kind of speaks to, like, eventually that copy has to change. And the more that copy has to change, the harder it's going to be for them to change it. And then it's really, really difficult to get a team of engineers to kind of go back and clean up their code. But the bigger the organization gets, the harder and harder it is to kind of keep a lot of this, like, really, I don't know, for lack of a better word, ratchet code running around and, like, supporting it. Because then you just kind of, doing a lot of fixes and patching stuff up. So I would say, if this is becoming an issue where you're like, I cannot perform content audits, I can't update anything, like, this is really bogging down the UX and the ability to do this work, I would have to say, like, take it up to a lead engineer and just, push for it to be on your roadmap and say, I truly cannot do my job unless the code is fixed and is workable and makes it possible for me to do my job, and see if, that can be something that can be put into something like a fix-it week or something like that, or a hack week, where they can just kind of take the time to set aside and be like, this is something that will impact us in the long run. Let's make sure we kind of, nip it in the bud right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have two related questions for you. One is from Dave. What are examples of voice and tone standards, And then related is from Fatiha. In a young team with a young product, how can I create copy without a precise tone of voice?
Yeah, I would say this is kind of one of the first things that folks work on in a writing team, is kind of just determining the tone and voice. So an example, you could say, like, are we kind of going with a more friendly tone, or are we going to be voice, or are we going to be more serious? Like, what does your company want? I'd say that's kind of a key thing before you can even start writing. Otherwise, you're just kind of writing in your voice and tone, which is fine, but, like, for product, maybe not so much. You want to, like, at least have the most bare bones basic standards. If you don't have any, look to your marketing team. They usually have determined something that they use for their marketing assets. And they've probably most of the time done some sort of study to be like, okay, our brand is X and not Y. Our brand is, fun and energetic and youthful and not, archaic or corporate or whatever. And so you can kind of find that and be like, okay, so what does this, what would this voice and tone sound like? Like, what are these two different companies? Sometimes they even just do like a side-by-side comparison. You can say something like Apple's voice versus Spotify's voice, right? Like, they're not the same voice. And if you can put words to it, then you can kind of take your brand and start putting words to that. And that can help you determine like what your voice and tone is.
Yeah, that's some great feedback. I have a question from Karen around collaboration and making decisions. After you've gathered everyone's input while doing an audit, what are some strategies for making executive decisions about what actually ends up getting shipped, especially without people feeling like you ignore their preferences or requests?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I would say, the more you can visualize why you made that decision, the easier it is for people to handle like your answers. So, when you just put out an answer or some copy, it might seem really arbitrary to people who don't understand the process that you're doing. However, if you say something like, these were some really great options that were given out of these, we decided to go with this and we went to this because X, Y, and Z. You can say something about, the tone and voice guidelines really support this. This is just kind of a better feel for the product. Like, this is just easier to understand and comprehend. This can, essentially scale and be used later. We don't have to change this copy. Whatever you can do to just kind of bring more justification into why you selected the decisions you made, can really help kind of bolster that. And one really cool way to learn how to do this is to kind of go to design reviews, right? Because designers are very, very good at justifying every single thing that they've designed, right? So you'll sit there and someone will be like, well, why'd you go with a toggle and not a checkbox, right? And then someone just can't be like, well, I just like toggles more, that's not going to work. And they have to give justification as to why this was a better design decision than the other choice. And it's the same with copy. You have to be able to justify why you're using the words that you're using.
Yeah. Kate asked a question around how to socialize work and process, but I feel like that answered your question, Kate. If it didn't, then let me know. Sarah Beth's question, what are some content related questions you might ask if doing user interviews?
Oh, yeah. This is really awesome. There's some really cool ones that you can find. Like, I use this content strategy toolkit book a lot for stuff like that. But what I sometimes just kind of lean in on is like, when someone is kind of going through the flow, I'd be like, okay, so, what did you think when you first saw this notification? What would you do next if you saw this language, right? And just kind of getting it from them rather than being like, do you like this notification? Does this, is this feel all right to you? You can ask, like, does this make sense? What do you think is the next step? Do you understand what it's saying? Just kind of stuff like that to just kind of gauge like their true understanding. Because sometimes when you're asking people research questions, they want to be nice to you because they know that you're the researcher, and so they'll try to like overcompensate in a way and be like, yeah, it totally makes sense. I love it. It's wonderful. Because people are just nice, but you don't want that to happen. So sometimes that happens. You just kind of push through that and try to get to like the why do you like this? Why does this make sense to you? Like, kind of be the real answers behind it.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're almost coming up towards the top of the hour. So we have time for maybe just a couple more questions. A question from Dita. How do you maintain consistency across platform? Does it appear as the same words or any other concerns?
Yeah, so this is something actually like top of my mind right now. So I work on 3 different seller-facing products, all of which is like were invented last year, and none of which had like any semblance of coherency between the 3 of them. And so as a writer, it's kind of my job to kind of pull in things from each other and kind of start streamlining them. So the best way I do that is like, whenever I see language that pops up in one and pops up in another. Let's say if we're using the word cardholder instead of customer, right? I might be like, okay, we're using cardholder in this product. We should use cardholder in this product as much as possible as well, so that when people are using, when people are kind of on our platform, they know what we're using across the board. If we're saying disputes instead of chargeback, that should be across the board. One product shouldn't say chargeback and another product saying dispute. So as a writer, you're kind of in a really good position because you can read all of that copy and you can see which ones are not kind of meshing with everything else. And you kind of can make that executive decision of, we're not using this one anymore, and obviously justify it, figure out why you're not using it, and then change it and make sure that it's kind of aligned and everyone knows that this is the word we're using, and going forward, like that's just kind of what's happening. So
that makes sense. Our last question of the day is from Dana. In which format do you usually receive strings from engineering? Excel? Are there any other tools?
Yeah, when I asked them, they were like, yeah, we can put it into like Word or Excel. And I was like, Excel, please. And so they put it into a Google Sheets, which I am so sorry, Google, but I keep calling Excel, and they just kind of download it, and they actually helped me how to format it, which is really, really sweet. If you can't find someone who knows how to use Google Sheets, I only know how to put them in like different colors and like make the little windows bigger. But just find someone who knows how to format it for you. And, it literally takes like 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's on my radar, to find someone who knows all the hotkeys. Thank you so much, Laura, for answering questions. I got a lot out of this presentation. I got a lot out of the conversation on chat. People, help crowdsourcing information. A big thank you to everyone who made it today. I know there were some issues with the Zoom link, but thanks for everyone for your help in working through that. Our next event will be Wednesday, February 17th with Carmen Martinez, and she'll talk to us about conversational design. Until then, have a good rest of the day, and we will see you soon.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Bye.